One of the biggest and most freeing breakthroughs that I've had on my spiritual journey thus far is the realization that mystery itself is part of the divine experience. So, like, mystery isn't a flaw in the religious experience. It is the religious experience. So imagine I handed you a jellyfish and I told you to explain algebra to this jellyfish. You'd probably not do it because it would be a futile project, because the jellyfish doesn't have the concepts, it doesn't have the equipment, it doesn't have the cognitive ability to understand algebra. Yeah, what if that is the same situation as us with understanding God? We tend to have this assumption that if we can't understand something, that it's not real. But I'm going to assume if you clicked on this video, you're at least agnostic. But you probably still think that because you can't fully understand God, you can't have a relationship with God. But the mistake is thinking that the human mind can even begin to grasp whatever lies at the foundation of reality and our universe. Because at the end of the day, it's nighttime, but also our brains didn't evolve to understand ultimate truth. They evolved to keep us alive, to recognize faces, to avoid predators, to predict what happens next. In other words, they evolved to simplify reality into concepts we can actually use, which raises a fascinating possibility. Maybe the reason God feels impossible to pin down, so to speak, isn't because the idea is incoherent. Maybe it's because we're trying to compress something that simply doesn't fit inside a human mind. In 1917, the German theologian Rudolf Otto tried to describe what people throughout history had experienced when they encountered what they called the divine. He came up with a phrase so beautiful that people are still quoting it over 100 years later. Mysterium, tremendum, et fascinans. Fascinans. Yeah, okay, well, maybe my Latin needs brushing up a little bit. But it translates to a mystery that is both terrifying and utterly fascinating. He was arguing that mystery isn't an obstacle to the divine. It is one of its characteristics. It is a characteristic of the divine. Most of us think that if we add more descriptors to something, the better we will be able to understand it. You know, if you're going to describe a dog, it's furry. It's got 4 legs, mostly. It's adorable. It's cute. It's perfect. Sorry, I'm just talking about my own dog. You know, an atom has protons, electrons, neurons. So we think that the more attributes we pile on to God, the better we're going to understand God. But Pseudo-Dionysius didn't agree. He said that this approach completely fails God. He argues that every positive descriptor, every positive statement about God is, yes, true, but also completely inadequate. So you can say God is good, but then you have to immediately realize God isn't good in the ordinary sense that chocolate is good or a person is good. God isn't simply one good thing among other good things. God is supposed to be the source of goodness itself. So even the word good becomes misleading. Eventually, every description starts collapsing, and that's exactly where Pseudo-Dionysius wants you. And this is where negative theology comes in, also known as Apophatic theology. So instead of saying what God is, you start saying what God isn't. God is not finite. God is not material. God is not located in space. God is not one object among other objects. God is not comprehensible. So every not that we're using is stripping away this false image of God. So basically, the closer you get to God, the fewer words you have. The knowledge doesn't accumulate, it actually dissolves. You know, saying God is unknowable is maybe, it's an oversimplification. What we're really saying here is that God cannot be comprehended, but God can be encountered. And that's really what I want you to take away from this video. So yeah, a book that I recently read, The Cloud of Unknowing. It was written by an anonymous Christian mystic in the late 14th century. Author says there are 2 clouds. Above you is the cloud of unknowing, and then between you and the world is the cloud of forgetting. The cloud of forgetting is where temporarily you set aside everything that occupies your attention. Work, memories, worries, plans, and even your beautiful ideas about God. Not because these beautiful ideas about God are bad, but they are not God. And so the more you are holding on to those beautiful notions that you have about God, maybe you're thinking about nature, maybe you're thinking about, a big man in the sky with a beard, like it's those images and those concepts are standing in the way of you actually encountering God. So then you reach upward into the cloud of unknowing. A quote from the book is, "By love he may be gotten and held, but by thought never." I also want to talk about this guy, Meister Eckhart. He was also a mystic, a 13th century Dominican mystic. And he wrote, "I pray God rid me of God." It's probably not a prayer you've heard. You won't hear that alongside the Our Father. So he isn't asking to lose God. He's asking to lose his idea of God. Eckhart isn't saying that all our concepts of God are bad, or, he's saying they are necessary but incomplete. They're provisional. And they'll always be provisional. That's what it comes back to. It will always be a mystery, and that's where the divinity is. So if you're confused, that's okay. You're actually doing it right. These mystics aren't calling you to abandon theology at all, but they're just saying that if you only focus on theology, they become barriers to actually experiencing God. Augustine, he said, if you understand it, it isn't God. So if you're like, oh, I actually got it. No, I've cracked the code. I know what God is. It's not God. Because I think most of us, we want a God that can fit inside our head. Like all the other things we fit inside our head. We can put God in this little God box. We want to be able to explain God, defend God, define God. In Confessions, Augustine keeps returning to the idea that God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. He writes, "You were more inward to me than my most inward part, and higher than my highest." And that's such a cool sentence, because he's saying God isn't just another object out there to be discovered. God is somehow the very condition that makes knowing, loving, and existing possible in the first place. And we've even got Rumi. Rumi has some great poems about God. In his poem, An Awkward Comparison, he says, "Language does not touch the one who lives in each of us." Yeah, how do we encounter God? How do we actually have an experience with God? That's probably a whole other video, to be honest. Myself, personally, my goal is to have these mini encounters with God throughout the day. Technically, everything is an encounter with God. For a long time, I wanted to really segregate my experiences and be like, when I'm praying, when I light this candle, I'm doing a God thing. When I'm playing ping pong, oh my God, can I make a video without mentioning ping pong? Probably not. When I'm playing ping pong, that's not a God thing. When I'm cuddling with my cat, that's not a God thing. When I'm having a really deep, beautiful conversation with a friend, that's not a God thing. But all those things are experiences with God and of God, And I think just bringing that awareness into our experience. Like today, I was lying in the back garden and the sun was shining, and my beautiful cat with his beautiful green eyes was just staring into my soul. And I just simply kind of thought about that cloud of unknowing. It's more about maybe bringing yourself and what you're experiencing in front of God. I don't know. I could talk more about it, but I won't for now. But I will. Okay, bye.